I'm standing in the parking lot of Gulfgate Mall, just in front of the H-E-B store, here at the intersection of I-45 and the 610 Loop on the south side of the city. This is where Woodridge Baptist Church once stood. In the 1960s, 750 to 1,000 people would come here every Sunday. They would worship the Lord, they would hear the Bible preached, they would be discipled in their faith. But over time, the community around Woodridge Baptist began to change, and the church dwindled in size. Within 30 years, 1,000 had dropped to only 60 people, and the church needed to close its doors. This story has a happy ending because they were able to sell their property. They retained the name, and they helped a church that was starting in the Kingwood community. They gave the money to the church took the name, and today Woodridge Baptist Church in Kingwood is a strong, solid church, running about 1,000 every week. But not all stories end well. I'm standing in front of Eastwood Academy. Eastwood Academy is owned by the Houston Independent School District. But as you can tell by the shape of the building, it was once a church. Starting in 1927, Eastwood Baptist Church ministered to this community. But over time, the community began to change. People from outside the United States moved here. A different language was spoken by the predominant community residents. And as a result, church leaders had to decide, are we going to minister to the changing community, or are we going to stay the same? They decided over and over again to stay the same. In fact, I've been told by several church leaders that people from this church would stand at the doors and they would prohibit anyone coming in that did not speak English and did not look like them. It's kind of an ultimate irony that today, what was once a church that refused admission to Hispanics is now a school where Spanish is the predominant language spoken. We've lost this church to this community because church leaders refuse to change. As Baptists, we usually think of conversion as a good thing, but that's not always the case. I'm standing here in front of the Heights Abbey Lofts in the Heights community, just north of downtown Houston. Once upon a time, this was a thriving community, but in the 1980s, low-income families and immigrant folks began to move into this community, and property values de-escalated rapidly. Churches struggled to survive. But communities don't always stay the same. Though property values went down in the 80s, a developer came in and began to rebuild this community. Today, a piece of property in the Heights could easily sell for $1 million to $1.5 million. When we lost this church, we lost the ability to minister effectively to this community. Just a few blocks from Union Baptist Association on 34th Street and Gulf Drive stands the Hare Krishna Temple and Cultural Center. This was once the site of Gulf Drive Baptist Church. Frank Sharp in the 1950s developed the Oak Forest community, one of the first suburbs in the Houston area, and Gulf Drive Baptist Church effectively served this community. But by now, you can guess the rest of the story. Over time, the community changed, but the church didn't. The result, today, a Hare Krishna Temple and Cultural Center now stands where a Baptist church once was. In 2013, Union Baptist Association initiated Loving Houston. We served 6 of the most under-resourced communities across our city. One of the communities where we served was here in the Denver Harbor 5th Ward area. Not far from where I stand is McReynolds Middle School, where we went in and helped rehabilitate the property. There's also an African American cemetery, where we did a lot of work to beautify that spot and preserve it for the future. If we'd come just a couple of blocks north, we would have come to Faith Memorial Baptist Church. If we'd come here in 2013, we would have been greeted by a cyclone fence and concertina wire, basically saying to the community, you're not welcome here. The story of Faith Memorial Baptist Church is a remarkable story. In the 1960s, Faith Memorial was one of the mega churches in Union Baptist Association. Though small by current mega church standards, it ran around 1,500 to 2,000 week after week, and it was one of the largest and most influential churches in Union Baptist Association. But the community changed. Over time, the church dwindled. By around 2013, the church was running only 60 people and was about to go the way of many of the churches that we've already visited. Andrew Johnson was called as pastor. Just a young man, a recent graduate of Houston Baptist University, he came here to serve this church and this community. The story that he's going to tell is an exciting story of turnaround and possibility. Well, and this is who we have here with us. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you.
And Buddy Griffin. And we'll let Josh kind of bring you into the conversation as well. And Josh is just going to lead the conversation, and this is a time really for us to hear their story. Now, we're not here so much to give prescriptive advice on how to do things. We're here more to tell the story and allow you to listen and to pick up and to hear some of the things that happened there by way of encouragement to you as to the kinds of things that can happen. So, Josh, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, I want to introduce to you first Buddy Griffin, who has served on multiple church staffs over his lifetime here in Houston. He has recently written a book called What in Heaven is Going On at Church. And it's actually for sale out in the lobby. You can pick up a copy there. And it's a really interesting story. We've had Buddy at a previous quarterly meeting. You can see that interview online talking about how he has visited numerous churches and the experience that he had by going around to over 100 churches in the Houston area, what he saw, what he experienced. But he's here today because he grew up at Faith Memorial Baptist Church. And so, Buddy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up there and the pastor and the legacy and all of that?
Greatest thing ever happened to me was in 1950 at Rice Stadium. As a 10-year-old boy, Buddy Griffin sat there and heard a guy named Billy Graham say, you need Christ. I didn't understand that, but I remember running down and standing on that football field, and that day I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. Amen. I didn't know anything about church. I had a terrible background, terrible family. I'm going to tell you all that, but church became a place where I could go, and it was great. And so I just went to Faith Memorial Baptist Church. And it's, in 1951, I was baptized there by Brother T. Lamar Mathis, who was a tremendous mentor to me. And 5 years later, I walked the aisle not knowing that you could do lots of things in God's kingdom. I wasn't smart enough to be a preacher. I couldn't sing enough to be a music director, and I certainly couldn't be a missionary. But little did I know that God, He doesn't want your ability, He wants your availability. Mm-hmm. And 2 years ago, I retired after 50 years full-time pastorate, full-time ministry in the Houston area. And my last 12 years were at Sagemont. Had the privilege to serve at First Baptist, Second Baptist, Sugar Creek, plant a few churches, teach at HBU and all that. In the book called What in Heaven's Going On at Church, I visited over 140 churches, but as a secret church shopper. But I only wrote about 115 of them in the book. The 91st church I visited was Faith Memorial Baptist Church. I hadn't been over there in years. And when I walked in the door, tears ran down my face because I remember so much great stuff as a boy there. Met Andrew and we just got to talking, and so I'll let him take the story from there.
So this is Andrew Johnson, the pastor at Faith Memorial. Andrew, what was it like to become the pastor there? What did that process look like? How did you get connected to them? Tell us the story.
Sure. So I graduated from HBU in 2012, and I had a plan laid out, kind of the typical preacher plan, which is you got to do youth ministry for a while and then associate pastor, and God just pulled that out from under my feet. Really emphasized pastoral ministry. Throughout my college years, I had served in almost exclusively in a black context, the African American worship, as a youth pastor. So I knew whatever I wanted to do in ministry, I wanted to be somewhere in a multi-ethnic context, and if possible, somewhere in the inner city where I'd be on the front lines of where there's great need, kind of there in the action. So at that same time that I was graduating, Pastor James Morris, who was my predecessor, the second of three pastors, I'm the third. The first was T. Lamar Mathis, who was there 54 years. But Brother James Morris passed away in summer of 2012. He had a heart attack, and God was already preparing me to come to that place. I didn't know it at the time, but I found that they were looking online, and then I just applied and called probably 20 times, but that's how I got into the door.
So you were eventually hired, and what did you find when you got this job that you tried so hard to get?
Oh man, so I had been preaching since I was 13, and I'm, not to pat my back, but I was okay at preaching. It's a different thing though than pastoring. And the convention and Baptist life has started using this word revitalization now, but then it wasn't even really a thing. But I found that there was great need for change. And when I met with the search committee, I told them, if I'm going to be the pastor here, there is going to be a lot of great change. And two things will be that we will be multi-generational, which means that we will serve the current generation that's here, which is predominantly seniors, but we're also going to start serving the younger generations as well. But we'll also be multi-ethnic. So if we do ministry, the music, the preaching style, the mission initiatives, everything is going to be not only conscious of Anglo culture, but of the Black community and the Hispanic community and the Asian community that is so close to our church.
Now, actually, that's a good point. For those not familiar with the demographics of your church, tell us about your community. What's it look like?
Sure. So if you were to Google where we're at, it just says the Greater Fifth Ward, but there's a lot more history than that. We are on the east side of some railroad tracks that for decades had separated the Black community in Fifth Ward from the initially Anglo community and then eventually Hispanic community. So now we are, Denver Harbor is almost, very high percentage of Hispanic community, and the Fifth Ward is a high percentage of Black community. And so that's our major mission field there.
So year one, you're a brand new pastor, a young guy pastoring a church, predominantly people older than you. Year one, what did you do as the pastor?
So people ask, where did this plan come from? The only thing I really knew how to do was preach, so that's what I did. We preached, we walked through Jesus' comments to the churches in the book of Revelation. We talked through the book of Jude, where Jude really deals with some apostasy in the church and how we have to change the way we're thinking. And then we started walking through the book of Acts about what was the church intended to be. So during that year, I just preached the gospel and preached the word of God in an expository way, and built relationships to let the people know that I love them. And we made little to no changes year one.
And how did you engage with the community? Because you lived there for the first year, right? First year or two.
Sure, not too far from the community.
What did you do to engage the community or get to know the people in the community?
I started to, first of all, I was reaching out to every pastor I could get a hold of just to say, how do you do this? And I wanted to be teachable and I wanted to learn. That also included pastors in the community. There's not a lot of Baptists in the community, so we're building relationships with other denominations, building relationships with just the community context. So for us, that means Little League sports. We had a Denver Harbor Little League, Denver Harbor Football League, and so I was very involved in that. We had some gatekeepers that go to our church who are the presidents of that local Little League. So I wanted to have my face out there consistently, not preaching anything, not trying to recruit church members, but just being a presence for a while until I can kind of become familiar. A white face in a that's not usually there. If I came in wanting something or saying, y'all should come to my church, I don't know if it would have gone over so well without some consistent love and just presence for some time there.
You have talked before about doing a few funerals your first year.
14 funerals my first year.
And that having not only just some pastoral implications, but also some community implications.
Sure. So, as was stated, this used to be a church for the entire community, from children to youth to young adults, professionals, middle-aged, so on and so forth. But now it's just Grandma's church and Grandpa's church. But we had this very odd opportunity at Grandma or Grandpa's funeral to talk about the type of God that we serve, to preach the gospel, and to really speak about how the people of God come together after tragedy by the power of the Holy Spirit. So they heard the gospel and they were driven to say, well, I haven't been to Faith Memorial since I was a little kid. Maybe I'll go back to Grandma's church. And so we had a lot of growth from funerals, oddly enough. So.
Okay, so year one goes by, not a lot of changes, a lot of funerals, faithful preaching. Year two comes. What did you do in year two that was a little different than year one?
So the Lord led us to kind of title year two, 2014, as a year to build. So we were going to focus on facilities. As was seen in the first picture, we had a very old building, and still the building is very old, so keep that in mind. But a lot of needs, and just the aesthetic alone, I thought, was really hindering us reaching our community. It had barbed wire fence. It was the parking lot was, like the surface of the moon. It was just kind of a uninviting place. To start off this initiative, we painted a mural, a graffiti mural, on the side of a church that probably never was intended to have graffiti on it, but it was a picture of a dove ascending. It had multicolored hands raised, and it said unity. And what I was communicating to our church and to our neighborhood was that we are multi-ethnic by the image, that we are changing. There's going to be some changes coming soon. And so that was kind of a hard pill to swallow for some, but it set the tone for the year to really get our mind ready for the changes that were necessary. So
you get through a lot of year two. You're coming up on a major anniversary for the church. The church turned what this year?
75 years old.
75 years old. And this guy comes and visits your church.
Yes.
Tell us about that experience and getting to know Buddy.
Sure. So Buddy called before, just like he's probably called some of you in your churches, and said, explain what he's doing. He's writing this book, What in Heaven is Going On at Church. And he came into our worship service, and he was an encourager. He grew up there as a church, and he wanted the success to happen. Oddly enough, he had a relationship with some of my family, and January 1st, he really came in and consistently began to be a consultant to us. I'd shopped around, and consultants cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a month, and Buddy is a really good price at $0 a month. But he's not just some guy who had done a little bit of ministry. He had served at the highest levels within our context at some of the big name churches, and he'd seen efficient ministry done well. And he was able to bring that even to a smaller church and help us clean up what seemed a really overwhelming task of getting organized and adding infrastructure. The crowd had grown, but we still needed a lot of infrastructure.
So tell us about that, Buddy. What did you, something was driving you to get involved, and then how did you get involved?
Well, first of all, I didn't want to do that.
Okay.
But I call it a holy hunch. God just speaks to me. Of course, I love that church. And so as a secret church shopper, the book is all about providing information, firsthand information to pastors and churches to advance God's kingdom. I don't have any other desires of anything. So Andrew and I, first of all, we prayed, and I wanted to help him. But one of the things that I wanted to do is to be in the background the whole time, no matter what I did or what I could do, because he's the pastor. I didn't want to usurp his authority or make people think this is happening because Buddy Griffin is there. So I did everything I could to stay in the background. The building was a mess. I cannot tell you it. I'm the kind of guy that walks every piece of paper on my desk square and everything clean and all that, and it was just a mess. And worse than I can tell you. And so we had to clean it up. That's the first thing. I'm thinking, always look at a church from a lost man's perspective. If I walked in there, would I want to come back? Is it, and that type of stuff. So how do you do that? The list is so long of things we had to do, right?
Yes.
By the way, I want to interrupt. This kid can preach. This kid can preach. He loves the Lord, and he can preach. If that wasn't happening, I don't know what would happen to that church. So basically, I'd meet with him, and I'd have a list of 40 things we need to get done. Has no secretary, no help, toilets break, emergencies. It was all on him. So I thought I could come in and fortunately, you know, I think God's family always works together, and
Yeah.
I have some friends that I've known for years, and I called a guy that he's a big contractor, does big buildings, and I said, Roy, we got the biggest mess over here you ever seen. And so he came in, and we had 7 pianos that were all torn up out in the halls and stuff like that, and he brought his crew over, and we cleaned all that out. And then I called someone else, and this is not costing them a dime, not a dime. Mm-hmm. And we put a new ceiling in and roof, and now a ceiling and desk and furniture, and I mean, we just did what you would think needs to be done to make it presentable, okay, for the glory of God. And there's a lot of things still need to be done, and we're just now getting started. But with the events that have happened, the 75th anniversary, the church needs to be noticed. We need the community to talk about it. I went to a friend, raised the money. We put a huge sign on the church, said 75th, put the date up there, put yard signs in. The church had no stationery, even with letterheads. I got that donated with, and so we sent letters all over the place to pastors. I think we sent 60, 70 letters out saying, hello, Pastor. My name is Andrew Johnson at Faith Memorial Baptist Church. We're coming up with 75 years. And we would like for you to do 2 things. Number 1, pray for us. And number 2, would you write a letter of congratulations to our church? And so I got some little stickers that you put on the envelope that says 75. Now, we didn't do that. You guys know that if you're going to have people involved, they need to be involved. They need to do the work. The pews are just terrible, okay? So we got all the youth in there, and we got pledge, and we got lemon oil, and
put them to work.
Cleaned up those bins, and those kids are saying, I'm part of this. You understand what I mean? All you got to do is feed kids pizza, and they'll do anything. And so we were cleaning we did all those. We put a whole new foyer in. Floor, ceiling, paint, all that kind of stuff. All this is donated to them, okay, to the glory of God. Amen. And so the 75th came, and you know, I didn't ask to come, but he asked me to come and sit in on the meeting, and I did, and they were planning a meal, and they had bids like $4,500 for a meal and everything, and I'm sitting there about to explode, and he says, what do you think? I said, first of all, no. Cancel Bible study that morning. Let's get snacks, finger foods, have that first hour time for people to meet and greet, and then and we didn't pay hardly any, you know, we bought all the food, cleaned up the place. We had people doing everything. You're assigned to the trash, you're assigned to the greetings. And so everyone's getting involved. Wonderful, 500 people there. And then that night, I have a banjo band, a kids banjo band. We play all over. I've done that forever. And so I said, we're going to do a concert, and then I'll call James Coney Island, and we're going to serve everybody hot dogs. And he said, no one's coming, right? These Hispanic people aren't going to come here. Banjo in Spanish means bathroom. And baño, okay? Baño. So, you know, I didn't know what was going to happen. I had 56 kids on stage and everything, and we did this hour program, and then twice during the week they called me. I ordered 400 hot dogs. They said, you ordered too much, you need to order 100. And I said, look, we'll give them away. They can take them home. And we had 40 hot dogs left. We had about 400 people there. It was fun. People saw people having fun, and then we served the hot dogs. And so, see, with the sign, the cleaner building, these activities, people were beginning to talk. Then they had an Easter egg hunt. 400 and 350 kids came to that. So people are in the neighborhood talking about what they're doing down there. We just finished a men's. I used to be men's pastor, so we had a 4-week men's course on Saturday mornings, and last Sunday we had graduation. I think men should be praised for their victories in Jesus. Who claps for men that are doing what's right on purpose? Nobody does. So we gave them a T-shirt that says, I'm a God guy, and it says, Men of Faith Memorial Baptist Church, camouflage, and we gave them, you've seen those little armor coins like that? And we call them up, and they got to pat them on the back, and the family would stand up, and they're having a celebration for victory in Jesus. So this is not, we're not there by any means, but there's some momentum. And so there's a few other things going on too, but that's basically what's happening.
So Andrew, I want to make sure that they hear that message. You did a lot of facility, cleanup, renovation, new coat of paint.
Sure.
But you're not done yet. Now, also, let's talk about, you've had some churches come alongside you in that partnership effort. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think that it is hugely where our churches need to go to be multi-ethnic and to be reaching out, and where we had seen a lot of success there, we're able to talk to some other pastors, particularly Champion Forest Baptist Church, Sagemont Church, folks from all over that wanted to help. And really it's hard to find some consistent infrastructure in the inner city where you can give funds, where you can send missionaries and that type of thing. So we just pursued them with our desire of what we were trying to accomplish as a church. Lakewood, a lot of churches that were really focusing. Lakewood has an emphasis on Fifth Ward, and people have a lot of opinions about Lakewood, but there's not a lot of people that show up to the Fifth Ward, to be honest. So there's a lot of opinions of people who are not willing to come and serve, but we had people that were coming to share the gospel, lend help where they could, and in a community like that where it's lonely and really a rough grind, we're glad just to find friends that wanted to help.
Sure. So Lakewood donated a nursery to y'all. I mean, they basically came in and renovated your nursery.
Yes, they did.
Then you got additional facility help from Sagemont and others of Buddy's connections.
And the Oldham Little Church Foundation helped us with a new parking lot grant, so that was very helpful. And then also a lot of former members of the church or family members of the church started writing big checks. I mean, I guess I don't know what big is, but for us it was at other places, that's not that big, but for us, they really helped us out with some things.
So when you got there, it was 60 to 80 people-ish, and you had an 8-foot fence around it with barbed wire. Now you run about what on a Sunday?
Oh man, it's hard to gauge, 220 to 250.
Okay. And if there was something about, I mean, there are a lot of unique things happening at Faith Memorial, and there's a reason. If you've seen Andrew's face around before, his church has gotten a lot of attention for the revitalization effort. There are a lot of reasons for that. One is successful revitalization. There aren't a lot of successful case stories, and so this isn't the first stage that he's been on and the first interview that he's done about this. There's also a cross-generational partnership going on here that makes the revitalization situation even more unique, because you have guys from different generations walking alongside each other. So we want to leave some time for questions, but if there's one thing that you would want people to know about this whole revitalization idea, give us
Sure. Well, I would say, 3 things. First of all, it has to be multi-ethnic. And multi-ethnic does not mean you do what you think that culture wants. It means you become a student of other cultures. For 2 years, I was immersed in the black church context. I did nothing else. I preached, I hooped, I sang, I just dove into Ricky knows what I'm talking about. But I was in that culture and learned. And if you've never been a minority, which I would assume a lot of you have not, if you've never been in a minority context, you really don't know what it's like to come into a church with only people that look different than you. You say, well, the music sounds different than what you grew up with, etc. So become a student of other cultures. Go to a church service of a different culture and just tell them that you're here to learn. And so that's one thing. It has to be multicultural. It has to be multi-generational. Almost all of the new hot things that are happening in the city as far as church planning and contemporary churches, in many ways they don't serve senior adults. And our community is full of them, and we can't ignore them or think that we can do ministry without serving them. Likewise, there's also children and young adults and students. And so a lot of churches aren't racist, they're generationalist or whatever that would be. So those 2 things. And then finally, any success we had came from the prayer closet. That's not just a cute thing I add to it. That is literally where everything happened. And most of us claim to be prayer warriors, but we're not making time for it. The first year I made a little effort to pray, and I was ready to give up and quit and just cry in a ball in the fetal position somewhere. But I began to invest in a prayer life every morning for multiple hours. I had other guys coming in to pray with me, and that's where it all turned around. So the prayer closet is where powerful preaching comes from. It's where new vision and strategy come from, and it's where doors are open that we have nothing to do with. The same doors I was banging on year 1 just flew wide open on year 3, and that's because God got in there and did it for us.
Excellent. Could I say 2 things?
Absolutely.
No church is going to reach the community if they don't look like the community. When Mark Hartman went out to Sugar Creek, he surveyed that. They had a lily white congregation. Their ethnic group in that area was not that way, so he purposely recruited people of different races, and I forgot, qualified people that were saved, and he would have them making the announcements at the doors, so any ethnic person that lived in that community could walk in and say, hey, that guy's doing that, I could come to this church. And I don't know if you know what's happening out there. Their biggest problem is parking. Mm-hmm. It's turned around. Here's something that blew my socks off, okay? I've always been in mega churches, except when I was starting churches. I had no idea the lack of resources. I mean, at Sagemont, if I need 2 teachers or 10, I just go out in the hall and get them. If I needed $10 to go get some stamps, I could get that. When you have nothing, folks, it is a challenge to put the light bulbs in, the toilets break. Who's there to fix it? Okay, and some really dedicated volunteers. But that just blew me away. Not only the money and the physical resources, but the emotional support and the spiritual maturity. Can you believe when I walked in that church, I was walking down the hall, this is the 91st church I visited, and this man walks by me. And I said, that's Mr. Radican, my 5th grade Sunday school teacher. I looked at him, he sort of bent over. I said, Mr. Radican? He turned to me and said, Buddy Griffin, I hadn't seen you in ages. I wish I could tell you that was because of my great spiritual maturity, but it was mainly because I was such a pistol, okay?
Before we get to a time of questions and answers, we have probably 20 to 30 churches around the Houston area that are at that same strategic point in their journey where they can decide to seek out new life and try something new, or they can close their doors and we lose that foothold in the community forever. But before we drill down on that a little bit, let's zoom out a little bit. Tom, what's going on nationally and what are some of the other issues involved in this?
2 or 3 things. First, there has been a strong emphasis on church planting in Southern Baptist life. And it's been going on for years. And today, across our convention, we start about 1,200 churches every year. But that's counterbalanced by the fact that we close the doors on 900 churches every year. Mm-hmm. So, the idea that if all we could do is start churches and forget about some of the other churches that are in places holding property that we couldn't go back in and buy today. That's right. We are losing out by not focusing on some of these. The problem is not always that folks don't care. Sometimes the problem is the church doesn't want to change. And that's why we told the story over and over again at the beginning. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into churches and sat down with folks and said, we have people that want to help you. And they've resisted and refused because they liked it the way it was. And as long as they can pay the bills, as long as they can cover the utilities, they'll keep doing it the way they're doing it, even though they're dwindling smaller and smaller and smaller. The building is getting in greater need of repair and rehabilitation, and then they reach the point to where they can't do it, and by this time it's too expensive for most churches to come in from the outside and help. I had breakfast or coffee yesterday morning with a pastor, and at this point I'll protect the name to protect the guilty. One church that we had worked with over and over and over again, and we had connected or helped connect 3 or 4 different churches to this one congregation, and they had consistently, they would take help for a time, and then, once things had stabilized a little bit and they could manage, they sent them away. And it happened over and over and over again. Well, finally they reached the point to where they allowed someone to come in from the outside and basically just take over because it had gotten so far gone that they couldn't do it. It's costing this church about $6 million to come in. It's one of our mega churches. About $6 million to come in and rehabilitate that building. Most churches can't do that. We've seen a number of churches that basically just refuse help when help is available. One of the things that I really want to underscore is in the early stages, he went out and basically said, I don't know how to do this job, help me. And so he went around and he asked for help. He got it. He was open to people when they came in and said, let me provide some emotional support or some physical help. So there was an openness there that I think is critical. There's a partnership there that's critical. The Faith Memorial story would not have taken place if the only thing they had to rely on was Faith Memorial resources.
Absolutely.
It never would have taken place. And so this partnership between the churches, particularly in the suburbs, but the churches that have with the churches that need, that kind of partnership is absolutely critical. One of the downsides is most of the time the churches that have are only interested in coming in to take over rather than to revitalize. And so something in our own mindset has to shift. So that we're focusing on growing the kingdom rather than growing a congregation.
Good word.
There was a time in UBA history when John Bassanio, John Morgan, John Bassanio, they call each other First John, Second John. First John Bassanio, came and talked with John Whitty, who was the director of missions here in UBA. And he said, I understand I've reversed this. John Whitty went to John Bassanio and said, we've got about 30 churches here in UBA that are about to close. Can you do something to help? And John Bassanio turned to Harvey Kneisel, his minister of missions, and said, there are about 30 churches in UBA that are about to close their doors. And this was back when we had about 175 churches. And First Baptist came in and they undertook a program to try and help rehabilitate and revitalize congregations before it was ever cool. Right now, where I hope we are is, I hope we're at a beginning point where the idea of helping to save some of these places, particularly in the inner city and the near city, in the urban context, I hope we're at a point where eventually this is going to become cool. You know what? Church planning was not cool 20 years ago. And now it's all anybody that comes out of seminary wants to do. They want to plant a church. I hope we can tell the stories and change the culture so that the idea of going in and turning around something like this suddenly becomes cool. Now, it's going to require, and we've talked about this, this can't be a stepping stone ministry. This has to be God's calling upon his life where he has to literally marry the land and become incarnational in that community if it's going to really turn around and make a difference. What I've discovered is that we do have churches that want to help. We also have churches that are only interested in saving their building or keeping their program. they need to shift. Some of the outside churches need to shift too. It's not about taking over and extending your brand. It's about helping to revitalize some of these congregations and extend the kingdom. So there's some shifting that's going to need to take place all the way around. Now, please also hear this. I'm not saying that we only need one strategy. We do need a replant strategy. And we're helping churches do exactly that. They go in, they take over the property. I can tell you some great stories about that, how that's happening. And they can go in and in a brief period of time go from 20 or 30 to 700 or 800. And those are great stories because they're better able to minister to that community. We need that strategy, but we also need this one. And when we start to narrowing our focus too much and only think of one way of doing it, then I think we're hurting ourselves. So I think we need multiple strategies. I think we need to save the properties in the inner city. I think we need to figure out what the skill set is that's required for this kind of work, because the skill set for being an entrepreneur and starting a new church, that's going to be a little bit different than going in where you have to marry the land, be incarnational, where change takes place slowly rather than quickly. It's a different mindset, and it's going to be a different skill set, and we've got to figure out what some of those things are. But I think particularly in places like Houston, where we just continue to grow. When we lose property in the Heights, we can't go back in and buy it again.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it's going to require collaboration at a whole different level than I think we've experienced before. I think we can do it. I think we've got to do it. And I'm so excited for what you've done and some of the other stories. We could tell some other stories, but we invited you to come and to be a part of that. I do want to say, he's still learning. They don't have all the answers, but he is learning, and I think that's great, and that's what we want to reinforce.
Do any of you have questions for Andrew or for Buddy? You heard something that provoked a thought in you. Anybody want to ask them? We have a little bit of time for that.
You said something about across the denomination, there were about 900 churches that had failed. What would be the mix in that between little rural churches and inner city churches or large city churches? I noticed driving around the country, I see little small churches in towns boarded up, and but I know the inner city is a different kind of problem.
It is. That research is being done right now by the North American Mission Board. This much I can tell you: the majority of those that close in cities with over 100,000 in population.
For the sake of the video and also for you in the back, he asked what was the mix between rural and urban churches that are closing among those 900 every year. Anybody else have a question? I saw another hand. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Uvalde Baptist. There is a program, revitalization program that the State Convention, Southern Baptist of Texas, has come up with, and I've been in touch with them briefly, not to any detail, but are y'all aware of that, and what do you think of it, and does it have applicability to our situation?
First, both state conventions have worked on this, both Baptist General Convention of Texas and Southern Baptist of Texas Convention. The North American Mission Board, about a year ago, brought on someone full-time just to focus on revitalization. So I think there are multiple groups that are trying to figure this out right now. And I think all of them would say, we haven't nailed it yet. We're in the learning phase. So I would say, talk with the North American Mission Board, talk with SBTC, talk with BGCT. Everybody's trying to figure this out right now.
Probably more or less a comment. As you know, we have had a total revitalization at Broadway, and we now mirror the community demographically. And I've talked to all these agencies everywhere, all the way to the executive director of the Southern Baptist Convention. and no help, no help. And I'm afraid, I like what was said here today. I'm afraid a program may not be what we need.
Mm-hmm.
We need what we've had at Broadway. We need a desire on the inside, a lot of prayer, depending upon God. I'm not trying to give a sermon or anything like that, but I think that's what it's going to take. Whether you do this, you do that, and it works. So.
Agreed. All right, in the back, I saw 3 hands, so we'll start on this side. Closest to the door.
Yes, I'm wondering if there's some information that will help in trying to merge cultures. Churches in 5th Ward as well. And the community is primarily 50 to 50 African American Hispanic, where we are. And we are trying to bring these communities together. And I wonder if you have any information that can help us in doing that.
Well,
Yeah. I would say that, first of all, before we even started to walk into anything, it started with me reading a lot of stuff. The Color of Church by Rodney Wu. There's been a lot of work done by Michael Emerson, who's a sociologist in this field. And so it was a lot of research before we try to really enact some of these things. And it really is a great experiment. So like they said, we don't have it down as a science. I think what we've started that will eventually manifest in a fuller expression of multi-ethnic church, it starts from the top down, pastors building relationships. So reaching out to pastors of a different cultural context to you is really going to help you. You going into their worship services and seeing the differences, take a notebook and start to write out how different this, from the smallest things to the biggest things. I mean, we're still doing a lot of research now that's takes time to get implemented. But like I said, being a student of other cultures, I think, is the first step.
And since I am one, I'll say this. I think one of the first things Anglo churches have to acknowledge is we have a culture. Mm-hmm. And we keep thinking that everybody else has a culture, but we don't. And the truth is, we've all got cultures. And that this merging, this blending is going to have to go both ways, not
Yes.
just one way.
Yes.
And we've tended to make it very one-sided. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's going to have to be learning, reciprocity, give and take on both sides. Let me just kind of move down the line.
Yeah, what was the strategies that you implemented or the conversations that you had to bridge the gap between your older generation with your now attempt to reach younger generation? What did those conversations and how did you honor the older generation as you were talking about reaching the new families?
Sure. Well, let me first say that's never going to be a smooth path, and it's going to need to be one that's dealt with a lot of grace. Paul talks to Timothy about treating your elders as a grandparent, and I really try to stick to that when I wanted to fly off the handle about something. God forgive me, but I can stand on the Word way more than I can stand on new research or on my ideas that I came up with. So you can find multi-ethnic ministry all throughout the book of Acts and all throughout the Bible. And so really preaching until the heart was ready to receive. And so I think, finding what we're looking for in the scriptures encourages people not only at a mental, trying to re-envision things, but it captures the heart of the desire and the need for these things, even if we don't know the details yet of how it's going to manifest and how it's going to be implemented.
We're going to have time only for one more question because we promised Buddy a hard out at 11 o'clock. He's got another meeting at 11:30 across town, so I want to honor that. David?
Yeah, real quick question out of your prayer time. Sounded, listening to the story you did, some community ministries, sports related. Mm-hmm. I thought I heard Little League baseball and some football, but out of your prayer time, what other community ministries did the Lord put on your heart to help move the church outside the church?
I can be very honest with you. Church revitalization, sadly, is so all-consuming, that so much focus is internal. We've been working on building the foundations for so long that external outreach ministries are a huge need in our church because it's so been inward focused to try to get this thing up and running. what I was referring to in being in the community was not so much our church doing a big event in the community, because we lack the finances, the volunteers, and the manpower. It was me attending what was already going on in the community. So getting my face out there and just trying to build relationships within the community. You know, other initiatives that have come along through the prayer closet really is coming from other people who have new relationships of people that have done a lot of bigger event ministry type things. So friendships with people who can do block parties and things of that nature.
All right.
And I just want to add, just for the last couple of minutes, you've heard the word honor several times used in different contexts, whether that's honoring another generation or honoring another culture or honoring a legacy, whether it's a revitalization or a merger. There's a component of honoring what has come before that is always part of the success stories. And we could walk you through even the examples that are going on right now about how churches that took over a struggling ministry but went out of their way to honor the legacy that ministry had. Andrew didn't come in as a young guy saying we're going to bulldoze anything that the older generations have done, but we're going to honor that and build upon it. And I think that is a key component. And you also heard that about honoring other cultures and being a student of cultures rather than trying to impose a culture on top. So, you know, and I say that because I think in years past, whether a merging of a ministry or a takeover of a ministry it's gotten a really negative light because there wasn't that component of honoring what had come before to be a key part of the foundation. And I think what you're hearing from us is that there has to be that honor component in order for any of these situations to work, whether it's a partnership or a merger or whatever. Honor is a key part of that.
Absolutely. I want to say thank you for taking time to be with us and putting yourself out in front and answering questions and sharing your story. It really is a great story of the relationship, church you grew up in, and a chance to be able to come back to that church and make a difference going forward. Your investment, what it takes to pull your family out of the context and culture that they're comfortable in and move them into an inner city environment and just say, we're going to live here. We're going to marry this land and we're going to make a difference over time. That's a tremendous commitment, and I appreciate what you're doing. I know it gets lonely sometime, but we want to pray for them, and we want to pray that God will multiply the number of churches that we have the opportunity to impact by building partnerships and creative collaborations moving forward. So let's pray together.